Hey, what's going on, everybody? Decided to go ahead and do a video recap as opposed to writing a bunch, so we'll see how this goes. First game I wanted to talk about was Nebraska and Illinois. Probably chances are a lot of us got to see this game live, so some of this may be a bit of a review, but we'll give some thoughts on both teams, their performances, excuse me, touch on some uh, player performances as it relates to fantasy, as well as just kind of what I see for them going forward, things I may have learned. So here goes. So Illinois ended up winning the game 30-22. Was pretty one-sided in Illinois' favor. The odd way to start the scoring for the season would be the safety that came off a special teams blunder by Nebraska, and that kind of typified the day that they had. Just a lot of mental mistakes, a lot of breakdowns. One of the things that I think they really struggled with was just getting any type of cohesion on offense. It seemed like they had a few. I think they had a 75-yard run from Adrian Martinez and another 26-yard run. And other than that, they really didn't have many answers. Martinez was generally really bad passing the football, which is a little bit disappointing in his fourth year, and a lot of optimism surrounding him this offseason. But he was only, I think, 50% on the day. Yeah, 16 of 32 for 232 yards, a touchdown, and no interceptions. One of the things that early on in the game, he had a couple of wide open guys either in the end zone or near the end zone, and he missed both of them. That ended up being some critical points in the game. But their running game in general, aside from his two long runs, were really poor. They gave Gabe Ervin, the talented true freshman out of Atlanta, the start, and he nor any of the backs could really get anything going. I thought the offensive line was really poor in general. Illinois was regularly in the backfield, whether that was on run plays or getting after the quarterback. So Nebraska's offensive line was really bad. Heard some interesting quote from Scott Frost today where he apparently was confused by what Illinois was doing on defense and indicated that they had to scrap over half the playbook. That may be the case. It's a new scheme that Illinois is running, but regardless, that's kind of pretty terrible in week 0 or your first game of the season to essentially be totally out chess to the point to where he says he doesn't know what they're going to do. So touching on them from a fantasy standpoint, I mentioned this on Twitter the other day. One of the things I love about fantasy and also hate about fantasy is that you don't have to be a good player to be a high fantasy producer. And I think that is very much emblematic of Adrian Martinez and his game. He's going to put up those big rushing numbers like this, so he's always going to be valuable in a lot of fantasy leagues. But the reality is he just was really bad in this game. There's really not a lot of positives to take from him. From a receiver standpoint, the most impressive player for them was Oliver Martin. And Oliver Martin he tested out as an incredible high school athlete. So he's a talented player. I believe he was a transfer from Iowa, but I'm not 100% sure on that, and I don't have my notes in front of me. So anyway, he was really solid. I think he had six for 103 and a touchdown, including a 43-yarder. He paced their room. Other than that, no other receiver with more than 3 catches. But he was pretty impressive. They indicated they did want to get the tight ends more involved this season rather. And I would say that they attempted to do that, but not particularly well. And I think a lot of that has to do, again, with the poor passing performance of Adrian Martinez. Going over to Illinois' side of things, they to me, they weren't quite as good as the scoreboard showed. This game to me was a lot more about the lack of finishing and execution of Nebraska than it was a huge testament to Illinois. Now, credit to them. They have a new coach, new offensive scheme, new defensive scheme. They lost their starting quarterback in the first half, and Brandon Peters, the transfer from Michigan, and they relied on another transfer from within the Big Ten, Arthur Sitkowski. And he was kind of a ballyhooed recruit, and it was a big deal when he committed to Rutgers. But at Rutgers, you're going to be pretty limited, in particular the era when he was there. He actually looked pretty good. You really just need an old school Alabama 2008, 2009 game manager in this offense in general. The downside for that, or where that becomes a little bit more limited, is when you're not playing Nebraska and you're Illinois and you're playing one of the Big Ten teams that's in the upper crust of things. And that certainly wasn't the case here. That's really been my big question surrounding Illinois is when they play some of the bigger teams, can they just rely on this bully ball and pound the ball down their opponent's throats? They really didn't run the ball all that effectively at all. Kind of a weird thing that was talked about a little bit was Chase Brown was announced as the starter before the game. I think that was generally the expectation leading up all offseason. Got a ton of praise, announced on the broadcast as the starter, and then Mike Epstein gets the start. Mike Epstein's been in Illinois a long, long time. He's got more metal in his knee than the Terminator. His extensive knee injuries make Michael Penix's knees look like a picture of health. So good for him for being able to step up. He paced the room, 16 carries, 75 yards, and a touchdown. He didn't run the ball particularly effectively. He went down on first contact quite a few times, and I was watching. To start the game, he actually had 4 carries for 0 yards, was totally ineffective, and then got a nice seal block on an outside run on the right side and broke off a 45-yarder. And I went ahead and clipped his box score that showed 5 carries, 45 yards with a long of 45. So I had a pretty good laugh about that one. Circling back to Chase Brown, it came out that he didn't get any touches until the second quarter. In the second quarter, he started getting a few carries. I think he had 2, maybe 3, and then started the second half and had a really nice run between the tackles and broke some tackles and looked good, but then didn't have another carry after that. And so he actually finished third on the team in rushing with 5 for 24. And Reggie Love, who is another backup reserve for them, had 12 for 45. In regards to Brown and his future, because I know that he's of interest to a lot of fantasy players, Brett Bielema indicated that they knew that he was going to be limited during the game, so nothing was unexpected for them. I did read something online that was not confirmed, at least that I could tell, that there may have been some level of suspension, which would make sense. I think he's clearly their most talented back, and I think that will play out as the season progresses, assuming that he's either both healthy, if that was a concern, or can stay out of the doghouse if it was suspension related. So I don't think it's time to press the panic button on him, but it also was possible. I talked about in my team preview before the season that it was possible that they could go ahead and use more of a committee. So definitely something to monitor. We don't know how things are going to shake out there, but overall, I don't think they ran the ball all that effectively, and that's what they want to do. And while there's optimism surrounding this Nebraska defense being better, the fact of the matter is they didn't pass the eye test in terms of looking better, particularly in terms of getting in the backfield. They rarely bothered the Illinois quarterbacks from what I saw. I know that they did get the sack on Peters and then injured him. I just read a report that Peters is it's not deemed to be a significant shoulder injury, that he could be back as soon as this week. I have a hard time buying that with that type of injury. I don't think you rush him back. I think that Sikowski showed enough that they probably roll him out, let Peters get healthy, and then I do think it'll be Peters' team when he comes back. No interest for me from a fantasy standpoint. Sikowski actually played better than what I expected, but again, I think that could be a product of playing against Nebraska, who looks like they could be a really, really bad football team from top to bottom. So touching on a couple of the other skill players for Illinois, Isaiah Juice Williams is a player that I've had on the majority of my college fantasy dynasty teams out of St. Louis, a really dynamic quarterback that looked like he could run an iteration of the Rich Rod offense, which is what the previous offensive coordinator's background was in. And then when they came in and hired the new staff, they decided to move him to from quarterback to receiver. I think that ended up being a really good move. He's probably their most dynamic player. Still learning how to play receiver, but they did a nice job getting him the ball, like on end arounds. They did a little Tavon Austin pop pass to him where he almost scored. And they also got another really nice reception from Deuce Spann, who he himself was a quarterback up until this past week, and then they just trotted him out at receiver, and he had a really nice catch on a 45-yard ball from Sitkowski, where he was knocked out at the 1 and then they ended up punching it in. Luke Ford is a really, really talented tight end. He had 3 catches, 30 yards, and a score. He's a transfer from Georgia, and it was good to see him get involved. Again, I mentioned in my preview, if I were their staff, I would find a way to get him involved. And so it appears that he'll be a big part of the game plan moving forward. Williams, I'm sure, will be somewhat popular this week on waiver wires in some of your fantasy leagues. He may have been picked up before the game, actually, based on some of the reports about him being such a dynamic athlete. I think his usage is probably going to be sporadic, so it'll be hard to know when to start him. But again, this offense did show a little bit more creativity than what I expected with your typical Brett Bielema offense. So no real issue with Williams being a potential flex guy that you can put in there every so often. All told, I think that both teams are clearly bottom of the Big Ten. Again, I've mentioned it several times. I think Nebraska is a little bit. This was more of a negative on Nebraska than it was a positive on Illinois. They'll have a chance in another very winnable game this week against UTSA, Group of 5 team. I actually don't think that UTSA is going to be particularly outmatched. And I think some of the things that Adrian Martinez showed in his ability to scramble and create from that standpoint are other things that Frank Harris, the Roadrunners quarterback, is going to be able to do this week. So I think that there's, some fantasy implications and impact with this game that we learned. And I do think that there are major concerns from Nebraska, and I'm not quite ready to buy any significant Illinois hype because I think that they're built a little bit better to handle some of these bottom of the barrel Big Ten teams. And while there was some reason for optimism that Nebraska could be middle of the barrel, potentially upper middle, I think they're very much going to be lower middle at best, even if they perform a little bit better. So a few things that we learned from that one. On to the next one.